Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. No matter what time zone you're in right now, welcome back to Sip and Talk.
It's great to be here.
So, how are you holding up? I feel like you're still completely immersed in those Pentagon UAP reports from our last deep dive.
Well, for sure.
Seriously, do you have a dish antenna secretly buried in your backyard?
Yeah.
Trying to pick up some alien signals.
Huh. Well, if I did, I probably wouldn't be sitting here recording. I'd already be having a nice long chat with the FBI.
Right.
But speaking of alien signals and maybe extraterrestrial threats, after we discussed UAPs, our comment section just blew up.
Oh, I saw that.
Our listeners, our Sip and Talkers they were absolutely demanding that we focus on the three-body problem.
It's clear this is way more than just a popular sci-fi book at this point.
Absolutely. It's transcended the genre.
Yeah.
It's not just a popular book. You could argue it's the single most important piece of modern literature shaping how the East and West view each other right now.
And people don't just want us to talk plot. They want us to dissect that huge intellectual mystery surrounding the trilogy.
Exactly. Why is the exact same novel interpreted overseas, especially in the West, as this powerful anti-communist allegory?
Mm-hmm.
Yet within China, it is widely revered as a patriotic survival manifesto, a blueprint for national strength and rise.
This is where literature becomes like high-stakes political analysis. It's
It's a political Rorschach test. That's the best way to describe it.
That's perfect.
We get to observe how the identical text, the exact same story, can spawn totally opposite interpretations depending entirely on the political and cultural lens of the reader.
So overseas, readers see this profound critique of systemic collapse, right? The fragility of intellectual freedom, the destruction of humanity under totalitarian rule.
Precisely. But then domestic readers focus, laser-like, on the cold, hard logic of the Dark Forest survival theory.
And that somehow translates into a justification for a powerful, centralized national authority that prioritizes collective survival above all else.
Above individual rights, above almost everything.
That is a staggering gap. It implies that the core philosophy of the reader dictates the meaning of the book, not the text itself. What did Lou Sixon put into this narrative that allows for such a dramatic East-West split?
Does he leave enough ambiguity for both sides to claim him? That's the real question.
Exactly.
And today, we're going to dive deep into these nuances and try to answer that. We'll analyze how the devastating Cultural Revolution opening scene serves as the Western eye-opener to systemic critique, a literal literary trauma.
And at the same time, we have to explore why that axiom, losing humanity means losing a lot, losing bestiality means losing everything, became such powerful ideological fuel for nationalist sentiment within China.
It's the foundation for so much modern realist thought there.
Okay, let's unpack this. This is definitely a topic worth pondering. So grab your coffee, whether you prefer, the idealism of a light blend or the bitter pragmatism of a dark roast.
And bring out the reports, because we need a high-intensity, rational debate on this.
Let's do it. Let's start by dissecting the underlying political currents in the novel and the first half of that Rorschach test, the interpretation popular in the West.
To really grasp the overseas interpretation, which is, extremely popular among Western commentators, scholars, overseas Chinese communities, we have to analyze the very first scene of the first book, the three-body problem. It opens with a scene of just intense brutality during the Cultural Revolution.
That scene is absolutely crucial, but we can't just call it a tragic historical note. It's the event that poisons the well for the entire trilogy.
It's the eye of the book. It's the trauma that defines Yi Wenji's entire disastrous trajectory.
Exactly. The scene, for anyone who hasn't read it, is where Yi Wenji witnesses her distinguished physicist father, Yi Zitai, being publicly humiliated and then beaten to death by these ideological student zealots, the Red Guards.
At a struggle session, no less,
Mm-hmm.
at the Red Coast base. It's a moment of profound personal loss, yes, but its immediate allegorical read is a declaration of systemic failure.
The anti-communist allegory takes this event and says, this is the heart of the problem. This act of violence, carried out against an intellectual scientist, it symbolizes the party's campaign-style rule, which leads, invariably to self-destruction.
And it has an inherent anti-intellectual essence.
Right.
That interpretation is strongly rooted in what literary critics labeled trauma literature, reflecting the immense suffering of that era.
So the core takeaway for Western readers is the destruction of science, of humanity itself, driven by this irrational political fervor. It's an indictment of ideological purity just consuming objective truth.
And you see this reflected online. On discussion platforms popular with overseas Chinese, like Mobile01, readers frequently view this opening as the ultimate evidence of the darkness of communist evil, or, standard Eastern European communist-era norms.
The idea that the state prioritized control over progress.
Exactly.
But if the opening scene is so clearly anti-system and anti-intellectual, why do domestic critics in China often downplay it? Is there, a counter-interpretation of that scene that reframes it?
There is. Domestically, while the brutality is acknowledged, the narrative is often softened. It's categorized as a historical deviation or a period of great chaos caused by specific bad actors, like the Red Guards, or just factionalism.
So it's not a fundamental systemic flaw?
No, it becomes a lesson in the dangers of internal ideological drift, which is then used to justify the need for stronger centralized authority to prevent future chaos. Overseas, however, the narrative is clear. The system itself is the generator of the chaos.
Which leads directly to Yi Wenji's actions. Her trauma doesn't just make her retreat, it motivates her to commit the ultimate act, contacting the Trisolans, inviting them to either save or just destroy Earth.
It's a massive leap from personal trauma to species-level annihilation.
A huge leap.
Her decision is interpreted overseas as the final judgment. It's a declaration that human civilization, specifically the Chinese society she experienced, is unsalvageable, morally rotten, and needs external intervention.
So the distress signal isn't just a call for help.
No, it's a profound statement of philosophical defeat. I remember the Voice of America critique, which is often cited. They specifically criticized the narrative for depicting China as dark, brutal, and anti-human.
Which suggests that the solution proposed by the narrative external intervention is symbolizing that post-1989 intellectual disillusionment, where the intellectual class felt so defeated they were metaphorically seeking some sort of Western rescue.
A Western rescue, or just any external force to enforce change and morality. If the internal system is cannibalizing its own intellectual foundation, the only logical action, in Yi Wenji's despairing eyes, is to appeal to a superior external authority.
Which sets the stage for the antagonists, the Earth Trisolaires organization, the ETO, and that terrifying SoftOn technology. Both are seen as metaphors for a totalitarian toolkit.
The ETO is fascinating. It's comprised mostly of elite scientist betrayers who reject Earth's future. They're split into the redemptionists who want Trisolaran rule because they think the aliens are superior, and the Adventists who just want humanity destroyed.
So Western critics see the ETO as symbolizing internal political extremism. People so disillusioned that they seek the overthrow of the current system, even if it means worshiping an external strongman.
Right. And ETO's philosophy of species communism becomes a dark mirror, reflecting this warped totalitarian version of a utopian ideal where individual suffering is just irrelevant.
And then there's SoftOn, the surveillance technology that feels extremely relevant to our current world. It's not just a plot device, it's a critique waiting to happen.
Absolutely. SoftOn monitoring is the Trisolaran's ability to unfold a proton into two dimensions, etch circuits onto it, and then use it to cripple particle physics research on Earth.
But more terrifyingly, they use it to monitor human communication and implicitly thought globally.
So the SoftOn doesn't just watch. It actively cripples the intellectual foundation of human civilization.
How is that capability perceived as a direct metaphor for digital authoritarianism?
It's the ultimate form of political control. The SoftOn is a technological manifestation of the Great Firewall and the pervasive surveillance state. I think it was Reason magazine, which is known for its focus on individual liberty, that pointed out the SoftOn's ability to lock human science and monitor thought directly parallels the CCP's totalizing control over information.
Wow. The metaphor is powerful. If you control the information flow and actively hinder the fundamental ability to innovate,
you ensure scientific stagnation caused by political censorship. The critique here is relentless for the overseas reader. The internal system self-destructs, the disillusioned call for outside judgment, and the resulting external power is merely a technologically advanced, alien version of the same totalitarian control they sought to escape.
It paints a picture of inescapable oppression, whether it's internal or external. So while the overseas read focuses overwhelmingly on this tragedy of systemic failure, now we face that massive philosophical pivot.
Yeah.
If this is such a clear critique, how does the exact same text get repurposed as a patriotic manifesto justifying national strength within China?
That shift is where the book moves from trauma literature to pure geopolitical realism. We have to shift the lens from internal systemic criticism to the harsh, unforgiving logic of external survival, the dark forest.
Okay, let's talk about the dark forest.
The philosophical core of the entire trilogy is contained in the dark forest theory from the second book, and this is where the interpretation flips entirely.
Okay, let's quickly reiterate the core logic because it underpins the entire Chinese nationalistic interpretation.
The logic is brutally simple. It's based on two axioms. 1, survival is the primary need of civilization. 2, civilization continuously grows and expands, but the total matter in the universe is constant.
Which creates inevitable existential conflict.
Exactly. Therefore, the universe is an unforgiving jungle where every civilization is a hunter. And because you can never know another civilization's true intentions, the chain of suspicion, any exposure leads to destruction.
So survival demands hiding your strength or using deterrence like mutually assured destruction to keep a fragile peace.
And domestically, within China, this isn't seen as a theoretical sci-fi concept. It's repurposed as a realistic diplomatic and philosophical tool. This theory provides profound, cosmic-level justification for the party's long-standing strategy of Tao Gong Yin Hui,
which translates to hiding brightness and nurturing obscurity, but basically means hide your strength and bide your time.
Right. That's a powerful connection, isn't it? It elevates the principle of survival first above everything else. It frames China's geopolitical approach as not merely strategic, but cosmically mandated.
So it rationalizes the current geopolitical environment. It suggests that if China is being contained by the West, it's not because of political actions, but because the West, the existing hunters, are just following the rules of the jungle.
Hunting the exposed. You even see this metaphor used by outside commentators. I think you mentioned the scholar Neil Ferguson using the dark forest metaphor to describe U.S. containment efforts against China, viewing the U.S. as actively trying to hunt the exposed rising power.
It's a crucial ideological shield. It suggests that any policy that might be perceived as ruthless or aggressive is just necessary self-defense.
This framework leads us directly to the line that has become the philosophical cornerstone of this realist interpretation. Losing humanity means losing a lot. Losing bestiality means losing everything.
Okay, we need to unpack this fully because it is the ideological engine of the nationalist reading.
This axiom is embraced by nationalist readers as the necessary social Darwinist foundation for China's rise. In their view, morality, compassion, political correctness, that's the humanity, are potentially suicidal luxuries in a high-stakes environment like the dark forest.
So to survive, you must retain that brutal primal instinct, the bestiality.
The book served as a rationalization tool for ruthlessness. If the world is truly a jungle, then being ruthless isn't immoral, it's mandatory.
Which brings up the staggering contradiction within Liu Cixin himself. He wrote that brutal Cultural Revolution scene showing his personal trauma and distaste for state-sanctioned violence, yet he champions this extreme survival logic.
This is the core of his intellectual tension, the spiritual schizophrenia that critics talk about. While he clearly despises the brutal chaos of the CR, it caused his protagonist's trauma and is depicted with raw savagery. He simultaneously expresses a profound belief in the necessity of strong, centralized collective power for survival.
He sees personal freedom and liberal democracy as inefficient, slow, dangerous when you're facing an existential threat.
And this isn't just inferred from the text. He explicitly stated this to Western journalists, particularly in that controversial 2019 New Yorker interview.
Yes, that interview became an international flashpoint because he just laid his philosophical priorities bare.
First, he expressed this deep-seated fear of chaos, arguing that if China became a multi-party Western-style democracy, the resulting instability would be human hell.
He explicitly leans toward a technocratic or scientific ruling model,
where efficiency and order trump personal freedoms. It echoes the cold, calculated logic of his most pragmatic characters.
That sounds terrifyingly close to accepting a trade-off, trading personal rights for assured collective stability.
It is a purely utilitarian calculation. Furthermore, in that same interview, when he was asked about the Xinjiang situation, he provided a defense that prioritized stability and order over individual rights. He pushed back, asking the reporter if they preferred terrorist attacks.
Arguing that the state was helping the region develop and eradicate poverty, it highlights his overwhelming emphasis on order as the prerequisite for everything else.
For Liu, the memory of chaos, the CR, justifies the iron hand of the present.
That makes him sound less like a hopeful sci-fi visionary and more like an extreme realist whose philosophy was forged in the heat of historical fear.
And that view is dramatically reinforced when you contrast this later pragmatism with his unreleased 1989 novel, China 2185.
What did that early work depict before this shift in his worldview?
China 2185 depicted a surprisingly optimistic and highly democratic future for China, complete with elaborate voting systems, struggles for rights in virtual realities. I mean, it's a different world.
So the distance between that early idealism, believing in democracy and individual rights, and his current hardline extreme realism is just staggering.
It shows a writer who consciously adapted his philosophy, concluding that extreme realism, driven by survival pressure, is the only practical stance.
So the Chinese interpretation isn't just about celebrating power, it's also about selectively framing historical events, like the CR, as a painful but necessary lesson.
Precisely. Domestically, the CR is reframed as a historical lesson, a partial disorder caused by factionalism and weak leadership, not a systemic flaw inherent in the party itself.
And this narrative is then used internally to remind the party to self-correct and, crucially, to strengthen centralized leadership to avoid internal conflicts that could expose the nation in the dark forest.
It's a sophisticated maneuver, taking a national trauma and using it as justification for internal reinforcement and discipline.
And they certainly capitalize on the book's global success.
Absolutely. When Liu Cixin won the Hugo Award in 2015, party media outlets like People's Daily celebrated it as a massive win for Chinese sci-fi confidence and soft power. They claimed it signaled Chinese intellectual prowess on the world stage,
while often conveniently sidelining or ignoring the sensitive political critiques contained within the text itself.
Of course.
This whole situation reminds me of that analogy we discussed. You're working at a super chaotic, incompetent company, let's call it Chaos Corp. You are so fed up by the systemic nonsense that you message a powerful headhunter, the Trisolarans, saying, please come and take over. This company is unsalvageable.
Right, and the resulting regime change.
The headhunter comes in, fires the chaotic CEO, but then introduces advanced technology that turns every employee into a 247 working robot with mandated loyalty and no personal life.
So the external force wasn't salvation.
It was just a higher, more effective form of centralized oppression. Liu Cixin, based on his interviews, seems to hate the chaos, but philosophically accepts the 24/7 robot regime as the only way to beat the competition.
That's a profound encapsulation of the dilemma he presents. He channels the trauma of the past, but his resulting philosophical conclusion is one of extreme, almost ruthless pragmatism.
And this intellectual duality is best seen in how the final two major characters of the trilogy are interpreted by the opposing sides.
Okay, let's look at the ultimate moral test. Tinkin versus Thomas Wade.
The final book, Death's End, it truly crystallizes this core philosophical conflict through the actions of its two most polarized characters. These characters function as ideological mirrors.
And their interpretation by the New York Times versus Chinese official media reveals everything about the geopolitical tensions the book has come to represent.
They are basically designed as philosophical positions, aren't they?
Completely. Cheng Jin is the compassionate idealist, the humanitarian. She often symbolizes motherhood and great love. And she is consistently placed in a position of ultimate power, twice, in fact. And her decisions, based on morality, repeatedly lead humanity to disaster.
She is literally the character whose good intentions pave the road to hell for the entire species.
Exactly. And then there's Thomas Wade.
The other side of the coin.
He is the cold, ruthless, practical hardliner. He is the dark forest doctrine in human form. His mantra is chillingly simple. Advance. Advance. Advance at all costs.
He is the personification of the necessary bestiality required for survival.
The way these characters are used by Western media, particularly outlets like the New York Times, often follows the narrative established by the recent Western adaptations, using their failures as a cautionary tale for liberal systems.
So the NYT and similar Western analyses, they tend to view Cheng Xin as the symbolic failure of pure idealism or emotional traps in a high-stakes geopolitical confrontation.
They often mirror her mistakes against the U.S.-China rivalry, suggesting that Western reluctance to engage in pure realpolitik, like her compassionate decision to block the use of deterrence, is a fatal flaw. She represents the peace fantasy that is destined to fail.
So they're using her failure to critique Western liberalism's potential weakness when facing a ruthless competitor who plays by entirely different rules. What about Wade?
Wade, though antisocial and deeply immoral by traditional Western standards, represents the cold truth for the NYT. His pragmatism, even his brutality, is presented as necessary for survival. He is a warning.
If you want to win the existential game, you have to adopt the game's brutal rules.
Right. His willingness to execute political enemies is seen as symbolizing the kind of immoral survival that high-stakes realpolitik demands.
That's the overseas critique, a necessary warning about adopting a survivalist mentality. Now, let's flip the lens and look at how Chinese official media sources like the China Writers' Net or Tencent News interpret them.
The focus shifts entirely. It goes from external critique to internal warning. Official Chinese sources view Chen Xin as an internal humanitarian warning for the Chinese system itself.
Her emotional choices symbolize a soft weakness that needs to be corrected by strong, centralized leadership. They're cautioning against blind benevolence.
Essentially, they're saying we cannot afford to let sentimentality or morality guide national decision-making, because that weakness will be exploited by the dark forest universe.
And Thomas Wade, the hardliner, becomes a symbol of the required iron fist.
Or male temperament of loyalty and decisive, ruthless action for national survival. They don't celebrate his personal morality, but they celebrate his absolute utilitarian efficiency.
I remember the detail about his reduced sentence after his failed assassination attempt on Chen Xin.
That's interpreted as a message about the party's need for strong discipline and loyalty under the overarching survival-first logic. He's the necessary villain who performs the necessary actions for the collective good.
This summary paints a very clear picture. The NYT uses the characters to critique what they see as Chinese collectivism and lack of morality, or to warn that Western idealism is failing.
While the official media uses the characters to reinforce the necessity of the Iron Fist, represented by Schengen, and warn against the dangers of blind benevolence embodied by Chen Xin for the success of the Chinese dream.
It functions as a powerful ideological feedback loop.
It does. My personal takeaway is that Western media has largely stopped seeing Liu Cixin merely as a storyteller. They now view him as a translator of the Chinese system's logic to the outside world.
To understand contemporary geopolitical thought, the willingness to sacrifice individual rights for collective gain, the suspicion of international structures, the absolute priority of national survival, his works has become essential reading.
You're reading science fiction, but you're getting a masterclass in modern state philosophy.
This has been a truly comprehensive deep dive. We've explored the tension between the trauma of the Cultural Revolution and the cold, hard logic of cosmic survival.
And the synthesis here is that Liu Cixin's narrative is indeed spiritually schizophrenic. He expertly channels the immense trauma of the Cultural Revolution through Yi Wenji, showing the destructive capability of unchecked power.
But his ultimate philosophical conclusion is that only a strong, ruthless survival logic embodied by Wade and the Dark Forest theory can effectively protect civilization.
This literary ambiguity, this tension between the historical critique and the philosophical pragmatism, is exactly what drives the global split in interpretation.
It allows everyone to take exactly what they want from the book, a condemnation of systemic violence or a blueprint for necessary state power.
It is. And here's something worth pondering, especially given the book's global appeal. Even though Liu Cixin faces intense political scrutiny in the West for his political comments, his books are universally popular. Figures like Barack Obama and Mark Zuckerberg are known fans. Does this widespread cross-cultural popularity suggest a deep human craving for the sense of security provided by ultimate powerful protection, even if that protection comes at the cost of personal liberty?
Are we, at our core, drawn to the promise of order and security above all else?
That is the million-dollar question. We are drawn to the security even as we critique the methods. We are all, perhaps, secretly Wade fans in a crisis scenario.
I'd like to leave our Sip&Talkers with a final provocative thought. We've seen how the Dark Forest concept is used to frame U.S.-China rivalry. Can that concept be practically applied to understanding current geopolitical conflicts, like the global semiconductor or AI race?
When nations are constantly trying to advance technologically while intentionally hiding their true capabilities and intentions, the ultimate form of Tao Guang Heng, is that not the Dark Forest theory playing out on Earth, where exposure means technological destruction?
A truly unsettling thought to end on, suggesting that perhaps we are all living within the pages of Liu Cixin's narrative right now.
And to reiterate our objective analysis, we are not criticizing or endorsing any group, nation, or political viewpoint. We're simply providing an objective look at the facts presented in the book and the vastly different interpretations it sparks.
We're encouraging you, the listener, to engage in your own independent thinking. Thank you for joining us for this intense analysis on the philosophical and political dimensions of the three-body problem. This has been a fascinating discussion.
A big thanks to all our Sip&Talkers for tuning in.
Remember to subscribe to the Sip&Talk podcast and check out our old friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickytolife, for fun memes and travel vlogs.
We'll catch you next time.
Bye for now.